At the party, my brother leaned in and whispered something that should have stung. "Don't embarrass us tonight." My father stood a few feet away, smirking at something someone had said, his eyes sliding past me like I was part of the furniture. My mother stayed silent, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her gaze fixed somewhere safe. That silence was familiar. It always was, the kind that sided with cruelty without ever saying a word. My sister-in-law stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor with the confidence of someone who believed she owned every room she entered. She looked me up and down, lingering on my uniform. "We're closing million-dollar deals," she said loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "while you, a community college dropout, are just cleaning staff." They laughed. My brother laughed. My father laughed. Even a few strangers joined in, not knowing the context, only sensing this was the correct reaction. I stood there holding a trash bag, a service cart beside me, surrounded by polished surfaces and people dressed for importance. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just kept working. Because when people believe you're nobody, they speak freely. They say things they never expect to answer for later. They assume you'll fade back into the background the moment they look away. I didn't. The venue was a luxury hotel space, whisper-quiet air conditioning, lilies. I remember the smell of lilies, and candles, expensive ones, the kind that doesn't smell like anything you'd burn at home. A string quartet played in the corner. I don't remember the music. I remember everything else. Conversations about acquisitions, quarterly projections, the sound of people closing deals. Their deals, built on my money. The party marked the annual celebration of one of our subsidiaries. Acquired 18 months earlier. One of our subsidiaries. Our subsidiaries. Mine. I had built the company the way I built everything else in my life. Quietly. My name rarely appeared in public. I delegated appearances. I avoided the press. Visibility had never been the goal. Control had. Most of the staff had never met me in person. To them, the CEO was an idea, not a face. A title attached to decisions made somewhere far above their reach. No one had a reason to look twice at hotel staff moving through the room. My family had been invited as guests. My brother believed he was networking his way into something bigger. He didn't know the invitation had crossed my desk weeks earlier. I had approved it myself. Some situations are worth observing from the inside. They arrived together polished and confident, shaking hands, dropping names, performing success. I arrived separately through a service entrance carrying supplies. I had arranged everything through an outside staffing agency. To the hotel's permanent employees, I was just another temporary worker hired for the event. They had no reason to question my presence. No one questioned it. People handed me empty glasses without looking at my face. Someone gestured toward a spill with impatience. Another snapped their fingers at the floor. The uniform did exactly what it was meant to do. It made me invisible. When my family noticed me across the room, none of them approached. Instead, they adjusted their position slightly, turning just enough to block me from view, not openly, casually, as if I were something best managed through distance. When someone asked my brother if we were all together, he hesitated before answering. "Sort of," he said. "She helps out here. She's family." My sister-in-law added quickly, "Technically." That was enough. No one asked more. They didn't know what I knew. 5 years earlier, when their company was collapsing, when banks had pulled out and bankruptcy was inevitable, I had been the one who stepped in. They believed the money came from an anonymous investor, a stranger, someone generous and unseen. They told that story often, with pride, with gratitude. They never knew it was me. Standing there watching them laugh while wearing success paid for by my silence, I felt something settle into place, not anger, not sadness, clarity. The evening moved on. Conversations grew louder as the wine flowed. My family relaxed into their roles, confident the night was unfolding as planned. They had already forgotten I was there. At 8:45, the lights shifted. The room softened as staff repositioned for the main announcement. I finished my task and moved to the side of the room where I could see the stage without being noticed. At exactly 9 o'clock, the host stepped up to the microphone. He spoke about growth, vision, values. The applause came on cue, polite and rhythmic. Then he paused. "And now," he said, "please welcome our CEO." People clapped automatically, eyes scanning the stage, the wings, the places authority usually appeared. My family did the same, faces arranged in polite anticipation. I stepped forward. The applause faltered, heads turned. The silence that followed was absolute. I walked toward the stage without rushing. I didn't smile. I didn't look for my family. I felt their shock anyway, spreading through the room like a cold front. I reached the microphone and waited. The quiet deepened. Someone coughed. A glass clinked somewhere in the back. "Thank you for being here tonight," I said. "I won't take much of your time." I spoke about standards, about culture, about how the way people treat those they believe have no power reveals more than any mission statement ever could. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. When I finished, the applause returned slowly, then gathered into something solid. I stepped away from the microphone and walked off the stage without looking back. The night wasn't about embarrassment. It was about exposure. And it was only just beginning. The silence after my brother's warning settled into the room like permission. Not mine, theirs. I could feel it in the way his shoulders loosened, in how my sister-in-law stopped checking my position out of the corner of her eye. They spoke more freely now, their voices louder, their gestures broader, as if a boundary had been confirmed and locked into place. I was no longer a variable. I was a fixture. Someone who knew where she belonged and stayed there. That understanding, more than anything they had said to me, revealed how they interpreted my quiet. Not as restraint, not as a choice, as compliance. It started with small things. A group of people approached my brother, hands extended, smiles polished. I held my ground nearby, not close enough to interrupt, not far enough to disappear completely. When one of them glanced at me and asked, "Are you all together?" my brother answered without looking in my direction. "Sort of," he said, and my sister-in-law filled in the rest with a practiced laugh. "She helps out here sometimes." The word helps land light and dismissive, as if it were generous of them to acknowledge me at all. No one asked what that meant. No one asked me directly. The conversation moved on, and I was left there newly defined in a way I had never agreed to and couldn't easily undo without becoming the problem. Then came the requests, not from strangers, from my own family. My sister-in-law leaned toward me and said, "Can you grab more napkins?" the way someone might ask a server, her eyes already drifting away before I could answer. There was no please, no thank you, no acknowledgement that she was asking me in front of people who were watching. I opened my mouth. The words were right there, "I'm not your server," but I closed it again. Not yet, not here. I returned with the napkins and handed them over. She took them without looking at me, already mid-sentence, already back to being impressive. No one blinked. No one thought it was strange. That was the moment I understood this wasn't situational. It was habitual. A man standing nearby hesitated, then said quietly, "You don't have to do that." My brother cut him off with a laugh. "She doesn't mind. She's used to it." The word used carried more weight than he realized. Used to being asked, used to being overlooked, used to being made smaller so others could feel larger. The man nodded, uncomfortable, and stepped away. The discomfort didn't last. It never does when it isn't yours to carry. At one point, a woman I didn't recognize watched the exchange with a frown. She waited until my brother stepped away, then leaned toward me. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The question surprised me. It was simple. Human. Before I could answer, my sister-in-law appeared beside us, smiling too quickly. "She's fine. She likes staying busy." The woman looked from her to me, clearly unconvinced, but nodded anyway. The moment closed. Another version of the story is sealed. Later, my brother pulled me aside, his tone sharp, now irritated. "You're making things awkward," he said. "People don't know what to think." I asked him what he meant, and he sighed as if I were deliberately missing the point. "Just stay out of the way, hang back, do your thing. This isn't about you." The words landed hard because they were honest, not cruel, not dramatic, just true as far as he was concerned. This night, this event, this room full of people and potential, none of it was supposed to include me. I was here by accident, an inconvenient reminder of a family they preferred to edit. I looked past him, then searching for my mother. She stood a few feet away, her back turned, her posture rigid. She knew what was happening. She always did. When our eyes met, she held my gaze for a moment, long enough for me to think she might say something. Then she looked away. Not because she hadn't seen me, because she had. That was the difference. Silence born of fear feels different than silence born of choice. This wasn't helplessness. It was a strategy. Keep the peace. Don't disrupt. Let it pass. I felt clarity settle over me then. Not anger, not sadness. Understanding. I wasn't being misunderstood. I was being managed. So I stopped reacting and started watching. I noticed who said thank you to the staff and who didn't, who waited patiently and who snapped their fingers, who spoke kindly when they thought no one important was listening. Patterns emerged quickly once I started paying attention. Some people were consistent, others weren't. The room revealed itself in small ways, the kind you miss when you're too busy defending yourself. My family, meanwhile, grew more relaxed. My brother laughed louder. My sister-in-law leaned back into conversations without checking her surroundings. They believed the adjustment had worked, that I had been successfully repositioned. They were wrong about one thing. I wasn't shrinking. I was taking notes. I thought about the money. 5 years ago, when their company was failing, when the loans were coming due, and the investors had pulled out, when my father sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, saying they were going to lose everything. I thought about the decision I made then to transfer every dollar I had saved into an account they would never trace back to me. I thought about watching them celebrate their survival, their resilience, their business instincts, without ever knowing that the anonymous investor who saved them was in the same room washing dishes after dinner. They had built their recovery on my foundation and never once looked down to see who was holding them up. By the time the evening edged closer to its later hours, the dynamic felt fixed. I had been placed, my family clustered together, animated, confident, convinced the night was unfolding exactly as planned. They didn't notice the way people looked at them when they thought no one was watching. They didn't hear the questions that went unasked. They didn't see the quiet recalibrations happening around them. They believed control was something you exercised loudly, visibly. They believed it belonged to the one speaking. They were about to learn that power doesn't announce itself. It waits. She never finished anything. The sentence floated through the room, casually tossed out by my sister-in-law, as if it were a harmless fact, something everyone already knew and agreed on. I was wiping down a surface nearby, my hands moving on instinct while my attention snapped into focus. The words weren't sharp anymore. They didn't need to be. They were old, worn, smooth by repetition, familiar enough to feel almost neutral. Almost. What struck me wasn't that she said it. It was that no one challenged it. My brother nodded faintly. My father hummed in agreement. My mother's lips pressed together, but she said nothing. In their minds, that sentence explained everything about me. Why I was where I was, why I wore what I wore, why my silence made sense to them. They believed the past had already proven their point. The label had started early. My brother's progress was always narrated. Mine was summarized. He was described in motion, working towards something, becoming something. I was described in pause, always between phases, always not there yet. No one said I was failing. They didn't have to. The absence of expectation did the work for them. When I chose to attend community college, they heard the word community and filled in the rest themselves. They didn't ask what I was studying or why. They offered alternatives presented as help. When I declined politely and without drama, the temperature in the room shifted. Refusal, I learned, was interpreted as defiance. Not ambition, not independence. Defiance. There was one moment I remember clearly when I tried to explain myself. I said I wanted to build something on my own terms, that I didn't measure success the same way they did, that moving slower didn't mean I was standing still. The room went quiet, not with interest, but with disbelief. My father smiled the way people do when they're indulging a child. My brother laughed softly, shaking his head. No one argued with me. They didn't need to. They dismissed the idea as unrealistic and moved on. That was the last time I tried to translate my thinking into words they could hear. After that, silence became safer. Every time I remained quiet, it reinforced their narrative. Every time I chose not to correct them, the label hardened. What they didn't know was that during those quiet years, I was building something they couldn't see. Patricia. I remember Patricia. This was 9 years ago, long before my family's crisis, back when I was still trying to prove something to myself, if not to them. Restaurant owner, a small place on the east side. Her delivery logistics were a mess, routes overlapping, drivers sitting idle, food arriving cold. She was 3 months from closing. I charged her $300, spent 2 weeks analyzing everything. Her routes, her inventory, her staffing patterns. When I finished, she cried. She told me I had saved her business. She referred me to 2 other restaurant owners, then 4 more. Within a year, I was handling logistics for a dozen small businesses across the city. People nobody else wanted to help. People the big consulting firms ignored. I mentioned it once at Sunday dinner. My father said, "That's nice, honey," and changed the subject to my brother's promotion. My mother asked if I was making enough to cover rent, as if that were the only measure that mattered. They never asked about it again. I learned something then. The overlooked isn't the same as the worthless. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to pay attention. The investment fund came later, built on the same principle. Find what others overlook, understand it better than anyone else. Move before the market catches up. I learned from every mistake. I reinvested every profit. I lived in a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old car while my portfolio grew into something that would have stunned anyone who knew the label they had given me. By the time my family's business started failing 5 years ago, I had enough capital to save them 10 times over. I chose to save them once, anonymously, because I still believed family meant something that transcended scorecards and comparisons. They celebrated their mysterious benefactor at family dinners. They speculated about who could be so generous, so trusting, so willing to take a risk on their recovery. My father called the investor an angel. My mother said it was proof that good things happen to people who work hard. My brother joked that whoever it was probably wanted something and would eventually reveal themselves. I sat at those dinners eating quietly, listening to them praise a stranger who was sitting right beside them. Now, standing at the party, hearing that familiar sentence repeated with such ease, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. The label wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a solution. It allowed them to place me wherever they needed me without guilt. If I was the one who never finished anything, then nothing I built could threaten them. If I was perpetually behind, then my presence in the room could never disrupt the hierarchy they relied on. The past didn't justify the present. It explained it. This night wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical outcome of years of quiet decisions, mine and theirs, stacked carefully on top of one another. I had chosen silence to preserve my momentum. They had chosen interpretation to preserve their comfort. Both choices had consequences. By the time the evening pressed on, I felt oddly steady. There was no urge to correct them, no impulse to defend my choices or rewrite my history. I finally understood that approval from them had never been a realistic goal. They weren't withholding it because I hadn't earned it. They were withholding it because giving it would require them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about me. Once that truth settled, something unexpected happened. The weight lifted. Waiting for validation I was never going to receive had been exhausting. Letting go of that expectation felt like stepping out of a role I had been rehearsing without realizing it. They had already decided who I was. I just hadn't corrected them yet. I was refilling ice at the beverage station when I heard a voice I hadn't expected. "Excuse me, are you still doing logistics consulting?" I turned. Patricia Chen stood there, a glass of wine in her hand, her face lit with recognition. The restaurant owner, my first real client. 8 years ago, I had saved her business for $300 and 2 weeks of work. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "It's me, Patricia, Eastside Bistro. You restructured my entire delivery system back in—" She stopped, her eyes dropping to my uniform. The confusion on her face was immediate. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else." "Common mistake," I said, my voice level. but she was still looking at me, still putting pieces together. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the same way I had once watched her realize her business model was broken. "You look exactly like Patricia." My sister-in-law appeared beside us, her smile bright and sharp. She touched Patricia's elbow with the practiced familiarity of someone who had just met her 10 minutes ago and decided they were friends. "We were just talking about your expansion," my sister-in-law said. 3 new locations. That's incredible." Patricia's attention shifted, but slowly. She glanced at me once more before letting herself be steered away. I watched them go, my sister-in-law's hand firm on Patricia's arm, her voice low and confiding. The encounter lasted maybe 45 seconds. It changed everything. Within minutes, I felt the shift. My brother appeared near the bar, his phone in his hand, his face tight with something that looked like concentration, but felt like panic. My father moved through the crowd with renewed purpose, stopping conversations that had been flowing easily moments before. My mother positioned herself near the entrance, smiling at arrivals, redirecting foot traffic with the subtle skill of someone who had spent decades managing rooms. They were closing ranks. I moved toward the coat check area, wanting distance, wanting to think. That's when I overheard it. My brother's voice carried through the partially open door of a side office, low and urgent. "We can't have people asking questions tonight. Not tonight." A pause. "I don't know who she was talking to. Some women, it doesn't matter. Just keep her in the back until after the announcement." Another pause, longer this time. "No, don't make it obvious. Just redirect her. Tell her she's needed for cleanup prep or something. I don't care. Just keep her away from the main floor for the next hour." I stepped back before he emerged, my mind working through what I'd just heard. They weren't just embarrassed by me anymore. They were actively afraid of me. Not because of what I might say, but because of who might recognize me, who might ask questions they couldn't answer. The problem was Patricia. But Patricia wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that my world and theirs were starting to collide, and they were just beginning to realize they had no idea how big my world actually was. I thought about all the clients I'd worked with over the years, the small business owners, the startups, the people no one else would help. Any of them could be here tonight. Any of them might recognize me. Any conversation could lead to questions about what I actually did, who I actually was, how much I had actually built. My family had spent the evening managing my visibility. They were about to learn they couldn't manage my credibility. A staff member approached me, young, apologetic. "Excuse me, they're asking if you could help with some prep work in the kitchen for the later service." The kitchen, away from guests, away from anyone who might know me. "Who asked?" I said. The gentleman in the gray suit. He said you'd know what he meant." My brother. I could go. I could disappear into the kitchen for an hour, let them have their evening, let them feel safe. I'd done it before. I'd been doing it for years. Every family dinner I'd skipped, every celebration I'd missed, every success I'd hidden. I'd made myself small so they could feel big. The staff member waited uncertain. "Tell him I'm needed here," I said. But he said, "I'm sure he did. Tell him anyway." The young man nodded and left, clearly relieved to be out of whatever this was. I moved back toward the main floor. Not to the center, not to the spotlight. Just to the edges where I could see and be seen, where removal would require effort, where questions would follow action. My father noticed first. I watched him register my position, watch his eyes flick to my brother across the room, watch the silent communication pass between them. They'd given an instruction. It hadn't been followed. The system they relied on was showing cracks. My mother approached next, her face arranged in concern. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "maybe you should take a break. Get some air, you've been working so hard." "I'm fine here. It's just that—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like what they were. "Some of these people they might not understand. The uniform. They might get the wrong idea about the family." "What idea is that?" She blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. "That we're not... that things aren't..." She trailed off. That you're not as successful as you appear, I asked. That the story you're telling doesn't quite match reality. Her face went pale. I didn't mean, I know exactly what you meant. I walked away before she could respond, before the conversation could become something that drew more attention than my simple presence already had. Near the bar, I caught fragments of a conversation. Two men in expensive suits talking business. Heard their recovery story. Anonymous investor came out of nowhere. I always wondered about that. Convenient timing. Probably someone they knew didn't want it public. I kept moving, but the words followed me. Everyone loved the story of the mysterious investor, the guardian angel, the stranger who believed when no one else did. It was romantic, inspiring, perfect for a company trying to project confidence and resilience. What would happen if that story fell apart? If the angel turned out to be the daughter they dismissed? If their narrative of self-made success revealed itself as built on foundations they'd never acknowledged? My brother found me near the windows, his approach quick, his voice low and sharp. What are you doing, standing here? You were supposed to. He stopped himself, aware of people nearby. You know what I'm talking about. Do I? Don't play games, not tonight. I'm not playing anything. I'm working. Isn't that what you wanted? His jaw clenched. People are starting to talk. Let them. You don't understand what's at stake here. I looked at him, then really looked at him, saw the fear beneath the anger, saw the calculation behind the panic. He was trying to control something that was slipping away, and he didn't even understand what he was losing his grip on. I understand perfectly, I said. That's what scares you. He started to respond, but someone called his name. A potential investor, someone important. He looked between me and the voice calling him, trapped between managing me and managing appearances. Stay here, he said finally. Don't move. We'll talk after. He left. I didn't stay. I moved through the room with purpose, now no longer trying to blend in, no longer accommodating their choreography. I collected glasses, emptied trash, did the work I was dressed to do. But I did it visibly, deliberately, in places where their important conversations were happening, near the people they were trying to impress. And I watched their discomfort grow. Every time I passed too close to a pitch my brother was making. Every time I moved through a conversation my father was dominating. Every time my sister-in-law's networking was interrupted by my presence. They couldn't ask me to leave without explaining who I was. They couldn't acknowledge me without complicating their story. They couldn't ignore me because I was becoming impossible to ignore. The performance was crumbling. By 7:45, the strain was visible. My family stood in a tight cluster near the center of the room, their voices low, their gestures contained. They were recalibrating, adjusting strategy, trying to figure out how to put me back where they needed me to be. They didn't know it was already too late. The cracks in their narrative had started to show, and cracks, once visible, only grow wider. Near the end of the hour, I overheard my father speaking to someone I recognized as a board member of their company. Family business, really, built on trust and that anonymous investment, the board member asked. Ever figure out who that was? My father's smile never wavered. Still a mystery, but we're grateful every day. Lucky, the board member said. Not many people get second chances like that. We prefer to think of it as recognition of our potential, my father said smoothly. I moved past them close enough to be noticed, close enough for my father's voice to catch slightly before he recovered. The board member's eyes followed me for a moment, curious, then moved on. But I'd seen it. The flicker of doubt. The question is beginning to form. The night was far from over, and the truth was getting harder to contain. I was in the service corridor when it happened, the kind of place no one ever remembers afterward. The lighting was flat, the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and industrial floor wax, and the rhythm of the night softened back there away from voices trained to impress. I was doing something ordinary, checking a cart, making sure nothing had been left behind, when I heard my father's voice drifting through a partially open door. He was on his phone, his tone warm with the particular brand of gratitude he reserved for people he wanted to impress. I froze in place and listened. That investment 5 years ago saved us, he said. I still don't know who was behind it, but whoever they are, they took a chance when no one else would. We wouldn't be here without them." There was a pause while whoever he was speaking to responded. Then he laughed light and confident. "That's the thing," he continued. "They never came forward, never asked for anything. My wife calls them our guardian angel. Honestly, I'm just grateful they saw potential when the banks didn't." I didn't move. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I had known this for years, of course. I was the one who had made the transfer, the one who had structured the investment through layers of legal entities, so my name would never appear. But hearing him describe it, hearing him attach words like angel and potential to a faceless benefactor while treating me like furniture created a clarity I hadn't expected. He praised the version of me he didn't know while dismissing the version standing 20 feet away. The memory came back, uninvited, sharp and complete. The night I made the decision, I sat alone in my apartment, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors through the walls, and the heat only worked half the time. My laptop glowed in the dark. The number on the screen represented everything I had built over 7 years of careful workside jobs, calculated risks, sleepless nights. It wasn't a fortune by their standards, but it was mine. Every dollar earned without help, without shortcuts, without anyone believing I could do it. I remember my finger hovering over the confirmation button. I remember the silence in that room, how loud it felt. I remember asking myself if they would do the same for me, and knowing the answer before I finished the question. I transferred the money anyway, not because I expected gratitude, because I believed family meant something that didn't require a ledger, because I couldn't watch them lose everything and do nothing when I had the power to help. The 2 years after that transfer were the hardest of my life. I had given them everything, which meant I had to start again from nothing. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously, days at a warehouse, evenings cleaning offices, weekends doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses who paid late and complained often. I slept 4 hours a night on a good week. I ate rice and beans for months because protein was a luxury I couldn't justify. I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, washing them by hand to save quarters for the laundromat. During those years, my family celebrated their recovery. They bought new cars. They renovated their house. They took vacations and posted pictures online, smiling in places I couldn't afford to dream about. They never called to ask how I was doing. They never wondered why I stopped coming to Sunday dinners. They assumed I was busy with whatever small life I was living, the one they had already decided would never amount to much. I rebuilt slowly, deliberately. Every extra dollar went back into the investment fund I had drained to save them. Every skill I learned became a tool for something larger. By the time they were stable enough to forget they had ever been in danger, I had quietly become the person they would never believe I could be. When he ended the call and walked back toward the party, I stayed where I was for another full minute. I didn't need time to process. I needed time to decide what I wanted to do with what I had just heard. The information itself wasn't new. What was new was the confirmation that they had built their entire recovery narrative around gratitude for a stranger while actively working to erase me from the room. They talked about being saved. They celebrated their resilience. They took credit for the rebuild. And they had no idea that the person they owed everything to was the same person they had just asked to stay in the back. I thought about those family dinners, the ones I had attended in silence, while they speculated about their mysterious benefactor. My father once raised his glass and said, "Whoever you are, I hope you know you changed our lives." My mother nodded, her eyes wet with emotion. My brother joked that the investor probably had so much money they didn't even notice it was gone. I sat at that table, eating quietly, watching them toast to a stranger who was sitting right beside them. I said nothing. I smiled when expected. I helped clear the dishes afterward, the same hands that had signed the transfer documents, now scrubbing plates in their renovated kitchen. I carried that knowledge with me as I moved through the rest of the evening. It sat in my chest like a weight I could choose to set down or use. Later, I found myself near a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. My brother and sister-in-law stood together speaking in low voices that carried just far enough for me to catch the edges. "The timeline doesn't matter," my brother was saying. "What matters is how we present it. We took risks. We made decisions. That's the story." My sister-in-law nodded. "The investors don't need to know everything. They just need to see confidence." "Exactly," he agreed. "We control the frame." I had heard versions of this before. The family narrative had always been carefully curated, adjusting details depending on the audience. But something about hearing it tonight after watching them treat me as disposable while standing on ground I had paid for made the manipulation feel different. Not worse necessarily, just clearer. They weren't just excluding me, they were actively rewriting history to protect a version of themselves that had never existed without my help. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask questions that would have tipped my hand. I simply noted how often they recalibrated their story depending on who was listening, how certain details appeared and disappeared based on convenience. This wasn't an exaggeration. It was curated. The past was edited to support a present they wanted to protect. What surprised me most was how little it hurt. I had spent years bracing myself for disappointment, for the sting of being minimized or dismissed. This was different. This was clarity without emotion. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was interested. The realization scared me more than any insult ever had. There was a moment when my mother's laughter carried toward me light and careful. I watched her face as she spoke, the way she tilted her head, the way her hands folded together. I didn't wonder if she understood what had been done. I wondered how long she had known. She had sat at those family dinners listening to speculation about the anonymous investor, watching my father tear up with gratitude. Had she ever suspected? Had she ever looked across the table at me and wondered? Or had she decided, consciously or not, that it was easier not to know? I remembered one dinner in particular about a year after the investment. My mother had looked at me strangely, her gaze lingering a moment too long. I had just declined seconds, saying I wasn't hungry. The truth was, I was rationing groceries that week. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it, changed the subject, asked my brother about his promotion instead. Maybe she knew. Maybe she had always known. Maybe the silence wasn't ignorance at all, but something worse. A choice to look away because looking directly would require action she wasn't willing to take. As the evening continued, the pieces arranged themselves. A comment here, a correction there, nothing explosive, nothing undeniable on its own. Together they formed a picture that no longer required interpretation. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be talked through. It was a system of omission designed to keep certain truths quiet and certain people elevated. I happened to be inconvenient to both. I felt the distance settle in then, not as withdrawal, but as perspective. I wasn't their daughter at that moment. I wasn't their sister. I was an observer standing just outside the frame they had built, able to see its edges clearly. The desire to be included evaporated. Inclusion, I realized, had always come with conditions I hadn't agreed to. They laughed again, louder this time, relaxed in the belief that the night was unfolding according to plan. I held my ground, my thoughts precise, my breathing even. I didn't need to prove anything. Proof already existed. It didn't need me to present it yet. Timing mattered more than truth spoken too early. I understand that now. When I finally moved away, it wasn't to hide or retreat. It was to give the moment space. I had what I needed. Not leverage, not revenge, understanding. The truth was no longer hidden. It was just waiting. The atmosphere changed without announcing itself. I felt it before I could name it, the way you sense a storm before the air changes color. My family began looking for me more often, their eyes scanning rooms without ever calling my name. They weren't summoning me or dismissing me. They were tracking me. I felt it near the doorways. My brother's gaze flicked up every time I moved. My father's jaw tightened when I appeared in his peripheral vision. My mother looked away too quickly, then looked back to confirm I was still there. No instructions followed. No jokes landed. Whatever script they had relied on was slipping out of reach. The contradictions came fast. My sister-in-law murmured that I should stay in the back, that it would be easier. Minutes later, my brother demanded to know why I wasn't where he expected me to be. "Just stay put," he said. Then almost immediately, "Where did you go?" This wasn't a strategy. It was a reflex. They weren't steering anymore. They were grabbing at the wheel. I watched it happen in real time. My father suggested one thing and retracted it moments later, his confidence fracturing into nervous motion. My sister-in-law laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny, then went quiet when no one joined her. It was like watching actors forget their lines while the lights stayed on. The performance was collapsing, but the audience was still there, still watching, still noticing. A stranger brushed past me near the coat check and paused just long enough to say, "Tonight's a little sensitive, be careful, okay?" He didn't know why he felt it. That unsettled me most. The tension had leaked far enough for strangers to sense it without understanding the source. I moved through the room, deliberately choosing my path with precision. Every time I appeared somewhere unexpected, I saw the ripple. My brother's head turned mid-conversation. My sister-in-law's hand is tightening on her champagne glass. My father scanned the crowd as if looking for exits he hadn't noticed before. Then Victoria Ashford noticed me. I had seen her earlier circulating among the senior guests with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in rooms like this. Venture capital partner, board member of 3 Fortune 500 companies, someone whose opinion carried weight far beyond this event. She approached near the beverage station, her head tilting in that way investors do when they're assembling a puzzle. "Excuse me," she said. "Have we met before?" I kept my expression neutral. "I don't think so." "You look familiar." She studied my face with the intensity of someone who made their living reading people. "Boston, maybe?" "There was an investment conference last spring." My brother's head snapped up across the room. He couldn't hear us, but he could read body language. And my body language, holding my ground, meeting Victoria's eyes, not deferring, was wrong for someone in a service uniform. "I've never been to Boston," I said. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicious, curious. "There was a keynote panel, emerging markets. The speaker had your—" She gestured vaguely at my face. "Same bone structure, same way of holding herself." "Common features," I said. "Maybe." But she didn't sound convinced. "What's your name?" Before I could answer, my brother arrived. "She should get back to work," he said, not to Victoria, but to me, his hand gripping my elbow harder than necessary. His fingers dug into the soft tissue above the bone. I would see the bruises tomorrow, 4 small marks perfectly spaced. "I was just asking," Victoria started. "Family matter." My brother said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Sorry for the interruption." He steered me away without waiting for a response. His grip didn't loosen until we were in a quieter corner, away from the main flow of guests. "What was that about?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. "She thought I looked familiar." And nothing. I told her she was mistaken." He searched my face, fear sharpening into suspicion. His breathing was shallow, quick. I'd never seen him this unsettled. "What did she say?" "Exactly." "She asked if we'd met. I said no. Before that, about Boston." So he had heard something, or read enough from her body language to guess. "She mentioned a conference," I said. I told her I'd never been. "Had you?" I met his eyes, said nothing. Neither of us spoke. He wanted to push, wanted to demand an answer, but asking the question outright would mean admitting he didn't know everything about me, that there might be parts of my life he'd never bothered to learn about. "Stay away from the guests," he said finally. "Don't talk to anyone unless you have to." He released my arm and walked away, his shoulders tight with tension he was trying to hide. I remained in place for a moment, processing what had just happened. The panic in his voice, the physical force, something he'd never done before, the cracks in his composure. Something had changed. They weren't just embarrassed anymore. They were afraid. But afraid of what? That I might know people here, that I might have a life they hadn't sanctioned, that their carefully constructed narrative might have holes they hadn't accounted for. I rubbed my elbow where his fingers had pressed. The skin felt tender hot, a reminder that fear makes people dangerous, that control when threatened doesn't dissolve quietly. After that, their stories began to slip. I heard it in fragments as I moved through the room. My father told someone the company had been saved by incredible business instinct and a bit of luck. 5 minutes later, telling someone else it was strategic partnerships and careful planning. The timeline of their recovery shifted depending on who was listening. The role of the anonymous investor is sometimes mentioned, sometimes omitted entirely. My brother told one guest they'd always had strong fundamentals. Told another they'd rebuilt from the ground up. The same story, different emphasis adjusted for maximum impact. They corrected each other too late, too often. My father would start a sentence, and my brother would finish it differently. My sister-in-law would laugh at a joke my mother hadn't meant to make. The synchronization they'd maintained for hours was fragmenting under pressure. Fear made them short-sighted. They were so focused on managing me that they stopped paying attention to how they sounded, how they looked, what impression they were leaving on people who'd been watching them all night. They stopped watching the room. They watched me. Every pause became a question, every silence a test. I didn't react. I didn't correct them. That restraint became its own pressure. The calmer I remained, the more agitated they grew. My brother grabbed my arm again later, the same arm, the same spot, cutting off a conversation I was having with another staff member and steering me toward the back hallway. No apology, no explanation, just the physical assertion of control. "I need you to stay in one place," he said. "Pick a spot. Stay there. Don't move unless I tell you to." "Why?" The question seemed to surprise him, as if I'd never questioned an instruction before, as if my compliance had been so reliable he'd stopped expecting resistance. "Because I'm asking you to," he said. "That's not a reason." His jaw clenched. "Because people are asking questions. Because you're making things complicated. Because I need—" He stopped himself, took a breath. "Just do this one thing. Please." The please sounded like it cost him something. I stayed where I was afterward, neither retreating nor advancing. Present, unavoidable, neutral. The calmer I became, the more agitated they grew. They whispered urgently in corners, glancing toward me like conspirators who had lost the plot. Fear fed on uncertainty, and I had become a question they couldn't resolve. Victoria watched from across the room, still thinking, still connecting pieces. I could see it in the way she observed my family now, not with curiosity, but with the analytical focus she probably brought to investment decisions. She was an investor. She knew how to read patterns, how to spot inconsistencies, how to find the story beneath the story being told. She pulled out her phone at one point, typed something, waited, read whatever appeared on her screen, then looked at me again, her expression shifting into something I couldn't quite read. Recognition, confirmation, or just deeper curiosity. My mother approached me with rehearsed concern, her performance more obvious now that I knew to look for it. "Are you okay?" she asked loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Do you need anything water break?" Then she scanned the room to see who had noticed her maternal care, who had witnessed her kindness, who might remember later that she had tried to help. Even kindness had become performative. Even maternal care was about audience management. "I'm fine," I said. "You look tired." "I'm not." "Maybe you should—" "I'm fine," I repeated. She searched my face for something. Compliance, maybe. The old pattern where I would read her concern as genuine, where I would accommodate her worry by making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. When she didn't find it, she pressed her lips together and walked away. They didn't know what I knew. But they knew I wasn't afraid anymore, and that absence of fear unbalanced them completely. Fear is contagious. So is its absence. When the person you're trying to control stops showing anxiety, stops flinching, stops reacting, the power dynamic inverts before anyone acknowledges it out loud. The one who needs the other to be afraid becomes the one who's afraid instead. I thought about all the times they had relied on my silence, my compliance, my willingness to absorb discomfort so they could remain comfortable. That pattern had shaped decades of interactions. It had been the foundation of family peace, the unstated agreement that kept everything smooth. Now it was breaking, and they felt the ground shifting beneath them without understanding why. Near the main entrance, my father's phone rang. He answered, stepped away from his conversation, and spoke quietly. When he hung up, his face had gone pale. He looked for my brother, found him. They had a conversation I couldn't hear, but I could read the body language. Alarm, recalibration, decision. Something had happened. Some new information had arrived. Within minutes, all four of them converged near the bar. A family meeting in the middle of a networking event. Heads close, voices low, hands gesturing in tight, controlled movements. They were planning something. By the time the next announcement echoed through the space, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our program in 30 minutes," their composure was gone. They stood too close together, a tight cluster of tension. My brother's jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. My sister-in-law's smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by a blank expression that looked like shock. My father kept checking his watch as if time might save him. My mother's hands shook slightly when she raised her champagne glass. Their fear had finally taken shape. It was the uncertainty of not knowing what came next, of realizing that the person they'd spent all night trying to control knew something they didn't, that the balance of power had already shifted. They just hadn't figured out how far. They became kind all at once, and the speed of it was what gave them away. My brother's voice softened when he spoke to me, careful and deliberate, as if kindness itself were a tool he had just remembered how to use. My sister-in-law smiled too often, her expression frozen into something that approximated warmth, but felt rehearsed. My father nodded more than necessary, agreeing with things I hadn't said. My mother hovered, asking questions that sounded like concern, but landed like surveillance. From the outside, it looked like reconciliation. From the inside, it felt rehearsed. When people who once dismissed you begin performing goodness, it isn't mercy, it's containment. My brother pulled me aside near a column, positioning himself so the room couldn't see our faces clearly. His hands shook slightly. I had never seen him this unsettled. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "Things can get misunderstood tonight. We just want what's best for everyone." He started with money, casually. A small transfer, help getting back on my feet, something to smooth things over. Then he reframed it as protection. Of the family, of the image, of me. All he needed was for me to stay out of the way, not forever, just during a certain window, just not to be visible when it mattered. The offer was precise: silence in exchange for comfort, absence in exchange for peace. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated, then named a number that would have been generous if he'd had any idea who he was speaking to. $50,000, less than what I earned in a week, less than what I had already given them years ago. He watched my face carefully, waiting for gratitude or relief. For half a second, just half a second, I wondered what it would feel like to take it and walk away, to let them have their night, to disappear the way they wanted me to make it all stop being so hard. The thought came and went, fast, but it was there. I nodded once, slowly, enough to let him believe he had succeeded. Relief flooded his posture. His shoulders dropped, his breathing evened out. He thanked me as if I'd done him a favor, as if accepting money to disappear was an act of kindness on my part. That was when I noticed the rest of them working the room. My sister-in-law spoke softly to a group of women near the bar, her voice intimate, concerned. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Confidential, protective. The kind of voice that suggests vulnerability without naming it. My father nodded gravely to older guests, mentioning sensitivity, stress, misunderstandings. His hands moved in small, contained gestures, the kind that signal reasonableness, that ask for patience and understanding without ever explaining what for. My mother drifted between them. Her expression worried, reinforcing whatever version of the story was being told without ever saying it outright. She touched arms, leaned in, created moments of connection that felt personal even when they were strategic. They weren't reacting anymore. They were coordinating. This wasn't improvisation. This was a plan executed in real time, designed to shape the narrative before the night ended. They had done this before. Maybe not in this exact situation, but the mechanics were familiar to them. Control the story, manage the perception, protect the brand. A woman brushed past me and murmured, "Be careful, they're getting their story ready." She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The warning was clear. I felt the weight of what they were building around me. Not a cage, exactly. Something more subtle. A framework of explanations that would make sense to people who hadn't been paying close attention. A version of events that positioned them as concerned, protective, reasonable. And me as something else. Troubled, maybe. Struggling. In need of help, they were generously providing. My mother approached last. Her face was arranged into an expression I recognized from childhood, the one she wore when she was about to ask for something she already knew I would give. "Please," she said quietly, "don't make things harder than they need to be. Harder for whom? For everyone, for the family." "I'm part of the family." "Of course you are," she said, and looked away before the sentence finished landing. That was the moment it became clear they wouldn't stop. Silence wasn't safe. It was evidence they could use later. My compliance would become proof of agreement, my absence confirmation of whatever story they decided to tell. So I stayed calm. I stayed visible. I stayed exactly where I was. When the host moved toward the stage, my family's attention snapped into place. This was the window they had paid for, the one they believed they had secured. They expected me to disappear now, to retreat to wherever people like me belonged when moments like this arrived. I didn't. I stayed where I was. My brother saw it first. His smile slipped. His eyes went wide, then narrow. My sister-in-law's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles white. My father went rigid, his entire body locking into place. My mother looked away as if absence could still be arranged by refusal to see. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. They had confused observation with acceptance. They had believed that someone who stayed quiet for so long would never find her voice, and if she did that, it wouldn't matter. What they forgot was who decides when a room listens. The stage was already set. They just didn't know who it was for. For a brief stretch, everything went quiet. Too quiet. The questions stopped. The glances softened. My family moved through the room as if they had decided I was no longer worth tracking. It would have been easy to mistake that calm for relief, to believe the tension had finally passed. It hadn't. Silence like this isn't empty. It's loaded. I was near the service corridor when a woman I'd spoken to earlier paused beside me. She smiled apologetically the way people do when they're not sure if they've done something wrong, but suspect they might have. "I hope I didn't say anything wrong," she said. "Your brother asked a few questions about our conversation. I just told him you seemed very professional, very observant." She meant well. She didn't realize what she'd handed over. "What exactly did he ask?" I said. "Oh, just whether we talked, what we discussed. He seemed concerned about you. Said the family was worried you might be overwhelmed by the event." She touched my arm lightly. "It's sweet, really, that they're looking out for you." Sweet. I thanked her and watched her walk away carrying her misinterpretation like a gift she thought she'd given me. Neutrality. I understood then often chooses safety without knowing who pays for it. People who mean no harm can still cause it by refusing to see what's happening right in front of them. By staying neutral, by not taking sides, they effectively choose the side with more power, the side that doesn't need allies because it already has control. I stepped deeper into the corridor, needing a moment to think. That's when I heard voices through a half-closed door. My father, on his phone again. "No, they still won't say who the CEO is," he said. "Apparently she'll make an appearance tonight, some kind of last-minute decision." A pause. I could hear the smile in his voice. "Yes, we'll finally meet her. About time, honestly. I have some thoughts about the direction of the subsidiary. Figure I'll introduce myself after the announcement." I didn't move. They still didn't know. After everything, after the panic, after Patricia's near recognition, after the careful maneuvering, they still believed the CEO was someone else, someone external, someone they could impress. My father continued, "Should be announced around 9. I'm positioning myself near the front. Good networking opportunity." 9 o'clock, less than an hour away. I heard him end the call and moved before he could emerge, slipping back into the main space. My mind was working through the implications. They were planning to network with me, to pitch themselves to me, to introduce themselves to the CEO to me, as if we were strangers. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. As I stepped back into the ballroom, I caught Victoria Ashford watching my family from across the room. Not me, them. Her expression had shifted since earlier, less curiosity, now more calculation. She was an investor. She knew how to read rooms, how to spot inconsistencies, how to find the story beneath the story. She'd noticed something, I could see it in the way she observed my brother's too quick movements, my father's forced casualness, and my mother's strategic positioning. Victoria didn't approach me. She didn't need to. Whatever she was assembling, she was letting it finish on its own. The shift in energy was immediate after that. My brother pulled my sister-in-law aside, their voices low, their movements sharp and contained. My father checked his watch. Then I checked it again 30 seconds later. My mother drifted toward the stage area, scanning, assessing. They weren't relaxed anymore. They were coordinating. At 8:25, a staff member approached me with a clipboard. "Hi, sorry to bother you," he said. "There's been a change in the service schedule. We need some help in the prep kitchen. Should only take about 30 minutes. "Who requested this? He checked his clipboard unnecessarily. "Facilities management," which means he looked uncomfortable. "I was just asked to let you know something about getting ready for the post-announcement reception." The post-announcement reception. After 9 o'clock, after the CEO reveals. They were trying to move me somewhere I'd miss my own introduction. "I'm needed here," I said, "but the request came from—" "I understand. Tell them I'm managing a situation on the main floor." He hesitated, clearly caught between conflicting instructions, then nodded and left. 2 minutes later, another approach. Different staff members, different excuses. "Technical issue with the AV equipment in the storage area. They need someone familiar with the setup." I declined again. At 8:35, the approaches stopped being polite suggestions. A manager I didn't recognize appeared, his tone apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, but we've had a complaint. A guest mentioned feeling uncomfortable with service staff lingering in the main reception area during networking hours. We need to ask you to work from the peripheral stations until after the main program." "Which guest? I'm not at liberty to—" "Then I'm not at liberty to relocate." His expression hardened slightly. "This isn't a request." "Then it's a problem." We stood there, locked in a stalemate that was starting to draw attention. I could see my family watching from different positions around the room, waiting to see if their strategy would work, if systems and procedures and official-sounding policies could do what direct confrontation couldn't. The manager opened his mouth to push harder. "Is there an issue here?" The voice came from behind me. I turned. The man who had approached me earlier, the one who valued competence over sentiment, stood there with the casual authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. The manager straightened. "Just coordinating service logistics." "Looks like harassment to me." "I assure you." "I'm assuring you," the man said quietly. "This employee stays on the main floor. If there's a problem with that, bring it to me." The manager looked between us, recalculating. Whatever he'd been told to do wasn't worth contradicting someone who clearly outranked everyone in the building. "Understood," he said finally, and retreated. I looked at the man who had intervened. "That'll cost you," he said. "They'll try something else." "I know. Your family's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." "I'm counting on it." He almost smiled. "Brave or reckless? We'll find out at 9 o'clock. He nodded once and disappeared back into the crowd, maintaining his distance, his involvement invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But my family had been paying attention. At 8:40, the dynamic shifted again. My brother stopped trying to move me. Instead, he moved himself and everyone around him away from me, creating distance, establishing zones. If they couldn't control where I was, they'd control where everyone else wasn't. Conversations migrated toward the bar. Networking clusters reformed near the windows. The center of the room where I stood became suddenly noticeably empty. It was isolation through absence, exclusion without confrontation. For a moment, it almost worked. Standing there in the middle of an emptying space, I felt the pull of doubt. Maybe I should move. Maybe I should make this easier. Maybe visibility wasn't worth becoming a spectacle. Then I saw Patricia across the room watching. She caught my eye and did something unexpected. She walked toward me, deliberately, publicly. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier," she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "About logistics consulting. I'd love your card if you have one." My sister-in-law appeared instantly. "Oh, Patricia, I don't think—" "I'm speaking to her," Patricia said, not unkindly but firmly. "Do you have a card?" she asked me again. I didn't. Not on me, not dressed like this. I'm not currently taking clients, I said carefully. Shame. You came highly recommended by someone who said you built their company from the ground up. She looked directly at me. They said you were the best investment they ever made. The words hung there precise and deliberate. Patricia knew exactly what she was saying, and who she was saying it in front of. My sister-in-law's face had gone pale. Patricia smiled. Well, if you change your mind, mate. She handed me her card, her own card, before walking away. The space around me didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a stage. At 8:45, I saw my family converge near the entrance to the side offices, heads close, voices urgent. They were running out of options and running out of time. The announcement was 15 minutes away. I checked my position. Central. Visible. Unavoidable. Then I did what I'd been planning since this morning. I walked to the service corridor one last time. The garment bag was exactly where I'd left it, in a locked closet only I had the key for. I changed quickly, methodically, the way I'd done everything else tonight. The janitor uniform folded neatly into the bag. The dress I put on was simple, perfectly cut, the kind that announced authority without shouting for it. Charcoal gray, no jewelry except small earrings. Hair pulled back the same way I wore it in every board meeting. I checked my reflection once, adjusted nothing. Then I walked back toward the ballroom. The transition happened in the space between the corridor and the main floor. One step I was invisible. The next step was someone people's eyes would naturally follow. A few guests noticed the change, did double takes. I tried to place where they'd seen me before, but most people see what they expect to see, and they weren't expecting the cleaning staff to transform. My family didn't notice. They were too busy managing their own crisis to pay attention to a woman in a gray dress moving through the crowd. I positioned myself exactly where the man had indicated earlier, not hidden, not front and center, just in the natural sightline from the stage, where erasure would no longer be effortless, where the person who walked on that stage would see me immediately, where my family would have no choice but to watch me be introduced as exactly who I'd always been. At 8:55, the lights began their subtle shift. My family took their positions near the front faces, arranged in anticipation, ready to meet their CEO, ready to meet me. They still didn't know. In 5 minutes they would. I moved through the rest of the evening like someone who had learned the cost of assuming goodwill. I kept my head down, my movements precise, my words minimal. Every interaction was measured, every glance catalogued. I wasn't looking for help anymore. I was looking for gaps. After what had just happened, trust felt like a liability I couldn't afford. The irony was sharp. The more carefully I protected myself, the more alone I became. People noticed distance the same way they noticed confidence, and both can isolate you if you don't know how to wear them. It was during one of those quiet stretches, when the room seemed to reset between moments, that someone approached me without ceremony. He wasn't part of my family, and he wasn't one of the obvious decision-makers either. He had the look of someone who understood how things actually ran, the kind of authority that comes from proximity, not title. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that fit well enough to suggest success without advertising it. I had seen him earlier moving between groups with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. He didn't smile. He didn't lower his voice dramatically. He simply said my name and waited until I met his eyes. "You're being watched," he said, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact. Then he added, "Not just by them." I didn't respond right away. Silence had taught me its own language, and I used it carefully. He took that as permission to continue. He explained briefly, and without flourish, that certain adjustments had been noticed, that patterns didn't line up, that people who paid attention for a living were starting to do just that. He made it clear he wasn't here to save me. He wasn't even sure he liked me. What he offered wasn't protection, it was information. A door cracked open, nothing more. "There's a window," he said. "Small. If you want it, you'll have to step through yourself." Then he paused, as if weighing whether to say more. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I don't like sloppy manipulation. And tonight is getting sloppy." I understood then. He was someone who valued competence, who respected the rules of engagement, even when he didn't respect the players. My family's panic had offended his sense of how power should be exercised. Not the fact that they were trying to control me, the fact that they were doing it badly. The conditions came next, delivered with the same calm neutrality. If I took what he was offering, I couldn't hide behind the procedure anymore. I would be visible. I would be questioned. If things went wrong, he wouldn't intervene. His role ended at access. The rest was on me. It wasn't generosity. It was a transaction. And like all honest transactions, it named its risks up front. Across the room, my family felt the shift before they understood it. I saw it in the way my brother scanned the space more frequently, in the way my sister-in-law's laughter came half a second too late. They didn't know who had moved the board, only that something had. Control depends on exclusivity, and exclusivity was slipping through their fingers. They were used to defining me in private, shaping the narrative without witnesses. Now they were reacting to variables they couldn't see. I weighed the choice carefully. Accepting help meant surrendering a measure of control I had fought to keep. Refusing meant returning to isolation, to being maneuvered without recourse. This wasn't about pride or fear. It was about probability. I had learned the hard way that waiting for perfect conditions meant waiting forever. So I nodded once and said yes, knowing that agreement didn't make us allies. It made us temporarily aligned. I didn't give him my full story. I didn't need to. Instead, I confirmed enough to signal that the stakes were real, that what was unfolding wasn't a misunderstanding or a family disagreement inflated by emotion. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. He told me where to be and when, nothing more, no reassurance, no encouragement, just coordinates. From that point on, every movement felt louder. People noticed when I entered a space. Conversations paused, then resumed with careful neutrality. I could feel eyes tracking me, curiosity mixing with calculation. The anonymity I had relied on for so long was gone, replaced by a fragile kind of attention that could turn hostile just as quickly as it had appeared. Power, I was learning, doesn't arrive quietly. It announces itself by changing how others behave. My family sensed it too. They didn't confront me outright. That would have drawn the very attention they feared. Instead, they watched, whispered, adjusted their own positions as if proximity alone could undo whatever shift had taken place. They were losing the ability to speak for me without contradiction, and it terrified them. When you've built authority on silence, the possibility of another voice is destabilizing. At the appointed time, I moved where I had been told, feeling the weight of each step. The space wasn't hidden or dramatic. It was simply unavoidable. People passed through it constantly, and that was the point. I wasn't being set up for a reveal yet. I was being placed where erasure would no longer be effortless. The man who had helped me watched from a distance, unreadable, ready to disappear the moment his involvement became inconvenient. I understood the cost then. This wasn't a rescue, it was exposure. Every action I took from here on would be seen, interpreted, possibly misrepresented. I had traded invisibility for scrutiny, and there was no return policy. But there was also no going back to being managed, quietly folded into someone else's version of events. As the evening edged closer to its turning point, the room tightened with expectation. I felt it in the way people angled their bodies, in the way conversations shortened. My family stood together now, no longer pretending to be easy. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know where. For the first time, that uncertainty worked in my favor. I let myself be still and let the moment build, aware that every second etched itself into memory. Help, I realized, doesn't always come with loyalty. Sometimes it comes with consequences that demand more courage than solitude ever did. I wasn't invisible anymore. And that visibility, fragile, dangerous, undeniable, was both the power I needed and the risk I would have to carry forward. The room had settled into a tense, satisfied calm, the kind that appears only when people believe the danger has already passed. I stood where I had been told to stand, not hidden, but not invited, either occupying a narrow strip of space my family had failed to erase completely. No one was paying attention to me anymore, which was exactly why the moment worked. They thought the risk had been contained. They thought the quiet pressure, the small redirections, the last-minute adjustments had done their job. To them, I had been returned to the background, minimized, restored to a version they understood. That confidence was the last mistake they would ever make. The host stepped onto the stage with the easy posture of someone following a familiar script. Lights shifted subtly. Conversation softened, then thinned out. Glasses were lowered. Bodies angled forward. The room knew this sequence by heart. My family relaxed into it too. I watched my brother's shoulders loosen. I watched my sister-in-law straighten her expression, settling into practiced anticipation. I watched my parents adopt the faces they reserved for moments they believed belonged to them. They thought they had made it through the night intact. Whatever strain had lingered was dissolving into relief. The host welcomed the guests, thanked the partners, spoke about vision and growth in polished, comfortable phrases. Applause arrived on cue, confident, rehearsed safe. My family clapped with everyone else smiling at the right beats, eyes fixed forward. To them, the stage was a place occupied by other people. Power in their minds always entered from elsewhere. That belief had shaped everything they thought they knew about me. Then the host paused, just long enough for the room to notice. He adjusted the microphone, glanced down briefly, then looked up again. "And now," he said, his voice even carrying without effort, "please welcome our CEO." No name, no introduction. Just the title delivered cleanly. For a breath too long, nothing happened. Applause started automatically, then faltered. Heads turned toward the stage, toward the wings, toward the places authority usually emerged from. Someone on the far side of the room leaned forward, squinting. Another turned the wrong way entirely, already searching for a figure that wasn't there. My family did the same, eyes scanning ahead, then to the side, then back again, confusion flickering across faces that had never learned how to hold it gracefully. The pause stretched thin, precise, until it became impossible to ignore. I waited one more beat. Then I stepped forward, not quickly, not theatrically. I moved the way I always did when I knew exactly where I was going. My foot crossed into the light, and the sound it made, soft, deliberate, cut through the silence more sharply than noise ever could. A ripple moved through the room, recognition sparking in uneven bursts. A few whispers rose, then died. Someone inhaled audibly and stopped. The host turned toward me, registered what he was seeing, and stepped back without comment, leaving the microphone exactly where it was. My family froze. My brother's face emptied first, his certainty collapsing into something pale and brittle. My sister-in-law's smile disconnected from her expression, hovering for a fraction of a second before vanishing entirely. My father stared as if trying to reconcile two images that refused to coexist. My mother didn't move at all. When her eyes found mine, there was no anger there, no disappointment, only the shock of realizing that silence had not protected anyone after all. The room reorganized itself around me. People who had looked past me earlier now looked directly at me openly with the sharp attention reserved for those who mattered. Bodies shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Respect did not announce itself. It rearranged the space. Those who had dismissed me recalculated without apology. Those who had never noticed me wondered briefly and uncomfortably what else they had missed. I reached the microphone and waited. I didn't smile. I didn't search the crowd. I didn't acknowledge my family at all. The quiet deepened, not awkward now, but attentive, the kind of silence that knows it has been claimed. "Thank you for being here tonight," I said. "I won't take much of your time." I spoke about standards, not achievements, about how culture reveals itself most clearly when no one is watching, about how the way people treat those they believe have no influence tells the truth long before any mission statement does. Then I paused and let my gaze sweep the room. "This company was built on a single investment made 5 years ago," I continued, "an anonymous contribution that arrived when everyone else had given up. I've heard that story told many times. The grateful speeches, the theories about who might have believed in the mission when the banks wouldn't." I could feel my family's attention sharpen, their confusion deepening into something closer to dread. "Tonight," I said, "you're looking at that investor." The silence that followed was absolute. I gave everything I had because I believed family meant something that didn't require a ledger. I asked for nothing in return except anonymity. I watched from the background as the people I saved built their confidence on my sacrifice, never once wondering if the help might be closer than they imagined. I didn't name them. I didn't point. I had simply existed in a role they had denied me, and the contradiction did the work on its own. Their power had always depended on context. Context had just changed. When I finished, the applause came slowly at first, uncertain, then spread and gathered into something solid. Recognition, not celebration. I nodded once, stepped away from the microphone, and walked off the stage without turning back. I didn't need to see their faces. I had spent years memorizing that particular kind of silence. Behind me, the room filled with low conversation recalibration in progress. In front of me, the night opened into something quieter, something unclaimed. I felt lighter than I had expected. Not because I had won, but because I no longer had to carry what was never mine to begin with. Power doesn't shout, it reveals. The applause had faded by the time I stepped away from the stage, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise ever had. No one rushed toward me. No hands reached out. No voices called my name. People watched instead, careful and measured, as if any sudden movement might disturb whatever fragile recalibration was happening in their minds. My family was gone from my immediate line of sight. Not dramatically, not chased away. Simply absent in the way people become when they no longer know which role they're supposed to play. I had expected relief, maybe even satisfaction. What I felt instead was a hollow stillness, the realization that winning visibility doesn't automatically fill the space it leaves behind. A few people approached eventually, each interaction polite to the point of precision. Their words were chosen carefully, compliments framed as acknowledgments rather than praise. No one mentioned my family. No one asked how it felt. They spoke about the company, about direction, about values, as if anchoring the conversation to neutral ground might protect them from stepping into something personal. I understood the instinct. From this moment on, every relationship would carry an awareness of imbalance, a recognition that power had shifted and could shift again. Respect arrived, but it came with distance, and I noted how quickly admiration learned to keep itself safe. Victoria Ashford found me before my family did. She approached with a knowing look, her earlier confusion now replaced by something closer to amusement. "I knew I recognized you," she said quietly. "The keynote speaker, the investment fund. It was you all along." I didn't deny it this time. There was no point. "Why the uniform?" she asked. "Why pretend to be a staff member at your own company's event?" "I wasn't pretending," I said. "I was watching. There's a difference." She considered that, then nodded slowly. "You wanted to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching." "Something like that. And your family." She glanced across the room to where they stood clustered together, visibly shaken. "They didn't know—" "They knew exactly who I was," I said. "They just didn't know what I had built, or what I had given them." Her expression shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "That took courage," she said finally. "Not the reveal, the years before it, building something while everyone around you assumed you were failing." It was the most accurate thing anyone had said to me all night. Later, when the crowd thinned and the evening lost its formal edges, my family found me. They came together but spoke separately, as if they'd agreed on a strategy but couldn't coordinate the execution. My brother went first. His approach was tentative in a way I had never seen before. "You could have told us," he said, his voice tight. "At any point. Would you have believed me?" The question landed hard. He opened his mouth, closed it. We both knew the answer. If I had walked into a family dinner 5 years ago and announced I was the anonymous investor, they would have laughed. "That's not fair," he said finally. "Neither was asking me to fetch napkins in front of your business partners." He flinched, said nothing more. My father stood beside him, his usual confidence replaced by something brittle. "The investment," he said slowly, "that was really you, all of it. Every dollar I had." He looked away, his jaw working. The gratitude he had expressed so freely for years, the speeches about guardian angels, the pride in their survival, all of it built on a foundation I provided. The math was devastating. I watched him do it in real time. "Why didn't you say anything?" His voice cracked. "Why let us believe it was a stranger?" "Because I wanted to see if it would change anything. Knowing you'd been saved would make you treat people differently." He didn't respond. We both knew that answer too. My mother tried next, her voice soft, almost fragile. "I wish things had been handled differently," she said. "Public moments make everything so much harder." She spoke as if the problem were the exposure itself, not the years of silence that had made it inevitable. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. Her face went pale. "You suspected at least. You watched me struggle for 2 years after I gave you that money. You saw me losing weight, wearing the same clothes, disappearing from events I couldn't afford, and you said nothing." "I didn't know for certain," she whispered. "But you wondered." She couldn't meet my eyes. That was enough to answer enough. My sister-in-law kept her distance. She hadn't approached me once since the reveal, staying close to my brother like a shadow. Her earlier confidence completely dissolved. When our eyes met across the room, she looked away immediately. There would be no confrontation from her tonight. Not long after, someone else pulled me aside, their tone sympathetic. They suggested I had the opportunity now to end the situation gracefully, to demonstrate generosity and victory. Forgiveness, they implied, would elevate me further. Consequences might brand me as harsh. The expectation was subtle but unmistakable. The burden of resolution belonged to me. "Thank you for the advice," I said politely. "I'll consider it." I had no intention of considering it. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed anyone on a timeline that made them comfortable. Alone for the first time that night, I allowed myself to sit with the question I'd been avoiding. Who was I going to be now that no one could tell me who I was? I thought about all the years I'd remained quiet, how that silence had been interpreted as consent, as weakness, as insignificance. How easily people had benefited from my restraint, how comfortable they'd become inside it. Forgiveness, I realized, couldn't be automatic. It had to be chosen honestly, not offered as a performance to reassure others they were safe from accountability. The decision came quietly. I wouldn't retaliate. I wouldn't leverage my position to punish or humiliate. But I also wouldn't protect anyone from the natural consequences of their behavior. I wouldn't rewrite the narrative to make it easier for them to live with. Mercy, as I understood it now, wasn't erasing harm or pretending it hadn't shaped me. It was refusing to let that harm define the way I used power. When I spoke to my family one last time that night, I kept it brief. I didn't revisit the past or list grievances. I didn't demand apologies or closure. I told them only that I would no longer remain silent to preserve their comfort, that my absence from their version of events was no longer negotiable. There was no threat in my voice, no promise either, just a boundary clearly drawn and the quiet understanding that they would have to adjust to it on their own. My brother started to argue. My father tried to negotiate. My mother began to cry. My sister-in-law said nothing at all. I listened to each of them without changing my position. "I'm not asking for anything," I said when they'd exhausted their responses. "I'm not making demands. I'm simply telling you what I will and won't accept going forward. What you do with that information is your choice." I left them there, not defeated, not absolved, simply exposed to a reality they could no longer edit. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had earlier. Not because the situation was resolved, but because it no longer belonged to me to manage. Mercy isn't pretending nothing happened. It's choosing not to become what hurts you. Morning arrived without an audience. No lights, no murmurs, no careful choreography. I woke at the same hour I always did, but the day felt different in a way that didn't announce itself. There was no urgency to rehearse explanations, no need to brace for reactions. I moved through the early routine slowly, deliberately choosing clothes without thinking about what they signaled to anyone else. After everything had been said, after the room had listened, life continued in its quiet, ordinary way. That continuity was the most honest test of all. At work, the air held a subtle recalibration. People greeted me with the same words they always had, but their timing was different, their pauses more respectful, their assumptions fewer. No one asked about the night before. No one referenced my family. There were no compliments designed to align themselves with power, no performative deference. Just a series of small adjustments, the kind that lasts longer than applause ever does. Authority, I realized, isn't proven by how loudly a room reacts in a single moment. It's revealed by how behavior settles afterward. Later, I spoke with someone who had no idea about any of it. They didn't know the party, the history, the tension that had once defined my posture. They spoke to me plainly, asked direct questions, offered opinions without testing how they would land. There was no carefulness in their tone, no hidden math. It felt strange at first, like walking without armor, and then it felt right. This was the interaction I had wanted all along. Not recognition, not vindication, but simplicity. To be seen without being measured. My family reached out eventually. Their messages were tentative, unformed. There were no demands, no dramatic apologies, no attempt to reclaim the center of the story. Just fragments of communication that hovered, unsure of their place. My mother's message came first, 3 lines that took her probably an hour to write. She said she wanted to talk. She said she had been thinking. She didn't say what about, but we both knew. I read it twice, then set my phone down without responding. Not out of cruelty. I simply wasn't ready, and I had learned that readiness couldn't be rushed to make others comfortable. My brother's message arrived later that day. It was longer, more defensive, wrapped in language that almost sounded like an apology, but never quite committed to one. He mentioned misunderstandings. He mentioned pressure. He mentioned that family should be able to move past difficult moments. What he didn't mention was the years of dismissal, the laughter, the napkins he had asked me to fetch, the way he had blocked me from conversations as if my presence were a stain he needed to hide. I didn't reply to him either. My father didn't reach out at all. That silence told me everything I needed to know. He was either too proud or too ashamed, and I suspected it was a combination of both. The man who had called his anonymous investor a guardian angel now knew that Angel had been standing in his shadow the entire time wearing a uniform he found embarrassing. That knowledge would live with him whether he acknowledged it or not. I didn't rush to resolve anything. I didn't feel compelled to explain myself further. They were no longer the axis around which my decisions turned. Whatever remained between us had shifted into the background where context belongs when it's no longer the conflict. The money I had given them 5 years ago would never be acknowledged the way I once needed it to be. They would have to live with the knowledge that their survival had been built on the sacrifice of the person they had dismissed. That truth would sit with them at every family dinner, every celebration, every moment of pride. I didn't need to remind them. Reality would do that work. I thought about the woman from the Boston conference, the one who had almost recognized me at the party. She had sent an email through my company's website the morning after. She had figured it out. She wrote that she understood now why I had denied the resemblance, and she wanted me to know she admired what I had done. Not the reveal, she clarified, but the years of quiet building that had made it possible. She said most people would have demanded credit long before they had earned it. I had done the opposite. I read her email 3 times. It was the first acknowledgement that felt earned rather than obligated. That afternoon, a small decision presented itself, one so minor it would have gone unnoticed before. I chose where to sit in a meeting without scanning the room for reactions. I introduced myself without qualifiers. When a comment didn't require my response, I let it pass. None of it was dramatic. None of it felt like restraint. It was simply a choice exercised without fear of consequence. This, I understood, was the final form of power. Not control over others, but freedom from reflex. I thought about the years I had spent quietly, how easily silence becomes a role assigned by people who benefit from it. I didn't rewrite that past or condemn it. Those years had taught me how to observe, how to wait, how to listen beyond words. They had brought me here to a place where I no longer mistook endurance for identity. There was no regret in that realization, only clarity. Growth doesn't require erasing who you were. It requires releasing the need to justify becoming someone else. I no longer defined myself by titles or wounds or family dynamics. Those labels had served their purpose and then expired. What remained was rhythm. How I listened before speaking. How I left rooms without announcement. How I chose distance without bitterness. I didn't need to declare that I had changed. The proof lived in the way my days unfolded, steady and unremarkable, exactly the way real transformation looks. The janitor uniform hung in my closet, now cleaned and folded. I didn't throw it away. It had served its purpose, revealing exactly who people were when they thought they were looking at someone who didn't matter. That information was valuable. It had cost me nothing to gather and everything to finally use. As evening settled, I walked home without replaying conversations or imagining alternative endings. The story that had once demanded my attention loosened its grip, fading into something that no longer needed maintenance. I hadn't left because I won. I left because I no longer needed to stay. Some stories end with closure. Mine ended with distance. When I reached my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, no name. Just a single sheet of paper inside with my mother's handwriting. It said, "I knew. Not everything, but enough. I'm sorry I never said anything. I'm sorry I let it happen. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I knew." I stood in my doorway for a long time holding that piece of paper. She had known. Maybe not the full extent, maybe not the specific numbers, but she had suspected. She had watched me struggle through those 2 years after the transfer. She had seen me decline food at family dinners, wear the same clothes month after month, disappear from gatherings I couldn't afford to attend. And she had said nothing. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer. I didn't know what I would do with it yet. Forgiveness wasn't something I could manufacture on demand, and I had stopped pretending otherwise. I made dinner. I read a book. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. The next morning I woke up and lived my life exactly as I had planned to. No dramatic reconciliations, no tearful phone calls. Just the steady accumulation of ordinary days, each one proof that I had built something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Some debts can't be repaid with money. Some apologies arrive too late to matter. And some silences, the ones you choose, instead of the ones forced upon you, become the loudest statement you'll ever make. A week later, I received another message from my mother. She asked if I would consider having coffee with her. Just the two of us. No agenda, no expectations. She said she understood if I wasn't ready. She said she would wait. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went for a walk. The evening air was cool, the streets quiet. I didn't know what I would decide. I didn't need to know yet. For the first time in my life, the timeline was mine.